My name is Arven Soul. For 23 years I have served as a Verispex examiner for the Holy Orders of the Emperor's Inquisition. My duty was to examine truths, to dissect lies, to build cases from fragments of data and the subtle tells of a suspect's pulse. I believed truth was a solid thing, a rock upon which the Imperium was built. I was wrong. Truth is a serpent coiled in the dark, and it bites those who grasp it too tightly. The summons came not through my master, Inquisitor Valerius, but on a private channel encrypted with ciphers I had only seen referenced in theoretical texts. The man who appeared on my pict screen wore the oromite of the Adeptus Custodes, but his armor was unadorned by the laurels of the Captain General. It was the plain, terrifying gold of one who has no need for accolades, for his very presence is authority enough. Examiner Soul, his voice was a low hum like a power field idling. You are required. A grav-sled awaits you at the western bastion gate. Bring nothing. Speak to no one. I opened my mouth to demand credentials, to cite protocol, but the words died in my throat. His eyes, visible through the slits of his helm, were not human. They were the color of old stone, and they held a weight of millennia. He was not making a request, he was stating a fact of the universe, as immutable as gravity. The nature of the assignment, I managed, my own voice sounding frail. Sacred, historical. You will record testimonies. That is all you need to know. The connection died. I stood in the silence of my chambers, the hum of the hive city beyond the armored glass, suddenly feeling trivial. The custodes do not involve themselves with mere examiners. Our paths should never cross. To be summoned by them was either the greatest honor of my life or its effective termination. The ride in the grav-sled was a study in silent dread. The custodian driver did not speak. We plunged into the bowels of the Imperial Palace, past levels I knew existed only from restricted schematics. The air changed. The familiar, soot-tinged atmosphere of terror gave way to something sterile and cold, scented with ozone and a faint, acrid tang I could not place, like ionization after a psychic storm. We stopped in a vault so large its ceiling was lost in darkness, lit only by the faint glow of stasis field generators. Before me stood a doorway that was not a doorway. It was a slab of black stone, seamless, devoid of handle or keyhole, etched with circuits that pulsed with a golden light. Two more custodes flanked it, their guardian spears crossed before the entrance. My escort spoke a single word to them, a syllable that seemed to warp the air. The custodes uncrossed their spears. The black slab did not slide or swing. It simply ceased to be, revealing a corridor of the same dark material leading down. You will proceed, my escort said. The path is singular. You cannot become lost. At its end, you will find a chamber. You will wait. I stepped forward. My boots made no sound on the floor. The moment I crossed the threshold, the black slab rematerialized behind me with a soft thrum that sealed me in utter silence. I was alone. The corridor descended at a shallow, endless grade. There were no markers, no doors, no variants, just the smooth, dark walls and the cold, dead air. I walked for what felt like hours, my chronometer spinning uselessly, its digits glitching. Time itself felt thin here. At last, the corridor opened into a circular chamber. It was perhaps 30 meters across. In the center sat a plain chair, and a lectern of grey stone. Arranged around the circumference were 27 arches, each shrouded in a shimmering haze, like a heat distortion. There was no other furniture, no ornament, no source of the soft, sourceless light that filled the space. On the lectern lay a data slate. It was warm to the touch, its surface not glass or plasteel, but something smooth and organic feeling. When I lifted it, words glowed to life on its surface. Begin recording. Subject: the archived. Designation: Prime. A chime sounded, pure and clear. From the arch directly opposite me, a figure emerged. He was an old man, but not frail. He moved with deliberate care of a scholar, draped in simple robes of undyed wool. His face was lined not with age, but with the deep grooves of profound, relentless thought. His eyes were pale gray, and they fixed at me with an intensity that felt like a physical pressure. He did not wait for an invitation. He sat in a chair that I only then realized had manifested opposite mine. He smiled, but it did not reach those ancient eyes. Examiner Arvin Soul, of the American Conclave. Your psychological profile shows a 94% correlation with optimal inquisitorial analytical patterns, a fascinating outlier in pattern recognition synaptic development. They have chosen well. Ice water flooded my veins. My personal file was sealed with inquisitorial-grade encryption. My origin on America was a fact known to fewer than 5 people living. You will identify yourself for the record. I activated the slate, forcing my training to the surface.
I am the Prime Archive, he said, ignoring my command. You may think of me as Prisoner 1, though that term is imprecise. I am not a prisoner of walls, Examiner. I am a prisoner of knowledge, and you have been sent to share my cage. He leaned forward, and the chamber seemed to grow colder. Tell me, Examiner Soul, before you embarked on this noble path of truth-seeking, did you ever wonder why the Imperium, in all its glorious bloody history, has no definitive account of its own founding? Why the age of strife is a blank page, and the Great Crusade a poem with every second verse ripped out? I remained silent, recording. It is because history is not a record, it is a weapon, and the most powerful weapon is the one you convince your enemy never existed. He settled back, his gaze turning inward. My crime was not treason, or heresy, or rebellion. My crime was witnessing the moment the weapon was forged. I was there when the Emperor of mankind decided that the truth, the whole, unvarnished truth, was the one thing his nascent Imperium could not survive. The Prime Archive looked at me, and for a fleeting second I saw not an old man, but a youth filled with terrible, brilliant hope. Let me tell you about the day humanity was saved. Let me tell you about the day it was damned. They are, you will find, the same day. This is my testimony, the first truth. Listen and understand what it means that you are here to hear it. He began to speak, And as he spoke of treaties made with things that writhed beyond the stars, of genocides ordered not for survival, but for ideological purity, of a golden plan that required mountains of dead as its foundation, I felt the first crack appear in the world I knew. The data slate grew heavy in my hand. It was not recording words. It was drinking poison, and I was its vessel. When he finished, the chime sounded again. He rose without another word and vanished into his arch. I was left in the ringing silence, the weight of his story pressing down on me, the first stone of a mountain of heresy that I was now commanded to carry. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled my soul, that the empty archways around me were not all empty. They were waiting, and one of them, I was now sure, was waiting for me.
Sleep in that light-chambered vault was not a natural process. It was a surrender. My body, denied external stimuli, eventually shut down. But my mind raced through the Prime Archive's words like a man falling down a well, clutching at crumbling ledges of sanity. I dreamed not of the past he described, but of my own memories, twisted and reflected darkly. The case files I had solved, the heretics I had exposed. In the dream, their faces melted into the Prime Archives, and their accusations became his calm, damning testimony. I was jerked awake, not by sound, but by a change in pressure. The air in the chamber grew dense, charged with a metallic tang. A different archway shimmered, and a new figure stepped through. Where the archive had been intellect given form, this was violence fossilized. He was a giant, or had been. Now his frame was a ruin of scar tissue and crude black iron bionic augmentation. One leg was a piston-driven claw. His left arm terminated in a heavy, industrial-grade power grapple. His face was a mask of knotted flesh, one eye a red photo lens, the other a pale, dead blue orb that still somehow saw. He wore the tattered remnants of plate armor, but its heraldry had been burned away, leaving only scarred ceramite. He didn't sit. He loomed over the lectern, his breathing a wet, rhythmic rasp from a vox grill implanted in his throat. The data slate on the lectern flickered, its display glitching with static at his proximity. "Interrogator," he rasped out. It wasn't a question. "I am Examiner Arvin Sol. You will identify yourself." A sound like grinding gears came from his chest, a laugh. "I am the broken weapon. Your masters list me as Subject Gamma. Once I was Captain Lorcan of the 4th Company. No, that is a lie they let me keep, a kinder fiction. I do not know what I was. Only what I did." He slammed his power grapple on the lectern. The stone did not chip, but the impact vibrated up my arms. "I do not give testimony. I give evidence. I am the evidence.
Look upon the Emperor's masterpiece, scribe. Look upon his perfect, obedient soldier." There was no madness in his voice, only a cold, absolute hatred worn smooth by millennia like a river stone. "You speak of the Legiones Astartes," I said, keeping my voice level, my eyes on the data slate. "Your physical degradation is extreme. What happened to you?" "What happened?" he echoed. "Compliance happened. The Great Crusade happened. We were the tip of the spear, the fire that cleansed the galaxy for unity. We were told we were reclaiming humanity's birthright. We were told the Xenos were monsters, the separatists were traitors." His dead eye seemed to focus on something far away. "On the world of Galathan, we found humans. They had thrived during the long night. They had built a society that blended their own ingenuity with the teachings of another species, a symbiotic culture, peaceful, advanced." His grip tightened on the lectern. "Our orders were absolute. The imperial truth admitted no equals, no alternatives. Galathan was a beacon of heresy. It had to be extinguished, its history obliterated, so that no other world would dream of such a path." The wet rasp of his breathing filled the silence. "I led the assault on the Capitol spire. I killed men, women, warriors who fought with a grace and unity I had never seen. And when we reached the inner sanctum, I found their teachers, not monsters, beings of light and crystal, fragile, ancient. They did not fight. They sang, a song of sorrow, of farewell." He looked directly at me, and I saw a flicker of the man he had been, trapped behind the ruins of his face. My chaplain declared it a psychic attack. My librarian screamed of corruption. The order was given. I raised my bolter, and in that moment, Examiner, I hesitated. I saw not a demon to be purged, but a tragedy to be averted. For 1 second, I questioned. He held up his power grapple, flexing the crude digits. This was my reward, not for failure, but for thought. The flaw of mercy, they called it, a genetic instability. My entire company, brothers I had fought with for a century, were recalled. We were not executed. The Emperor's work was too precious to waste. We were repurposed. Our minds scoured, our bodies rebuilt for heavier labor, shock troops for the most vile war zones, where doubt was irrelevant because everything was a target. He leaned in, the smell of promethium and old blood washing over me. The Great Crusade wasn't just a war, boy. It was a filter. It wasn't about reuniting humanity. It was about sculpting it, removing the pieces that didn't fit the golden template, the peaceful, the curious, the cooperative, the weak, he called them. I called them the alternatives. And my brothers and I were the hammer that smashed every alternative to dust. He straightened up, his massive form casting a long shadow. My testimony is this: the first and greatest heresy was not Horus's. It was the one committed every day for 200 years in the name of unity, the heresy of a single enforced truth. We were not heroes, we were gardeners, pulling up every flower that wasn't the one our master desired. And when some of the tools started to notice the beauty of the weeds, they were melted down and reforged into spades. The chime sounded mercifully. The broken weapon turned without another word and stomped back toward his archway. At the threshold, he paused. You record this. Good. But ask yourself who will hear it. And when you realize the answer is no one, ask yourself the next question. Why are you here? He vanished into the haze. I looked down at the data slate. The file for Subject Gamma was massive, a labyrinth of redacted field reports, casualty lists from forgotten compliance actions, and a final chilling designation: asset status reclaimed, neural compliance enforced, assignment penitential legions. The weapon hadn't broken. It had been broken, deliberately, and its testimony was a blueprint for a galaxy where doubt was the only real crime. The silence after he left was different. It wasn't empty, it was watchful. The other archways seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. I was no longer just a recorder. I was an archaeologist, digging up graves, and the things I was unearthing were starting to whisper my name.
Time in the vault became a liquid thing. It flowed without markers, measured only by the arrival of new testimonies and the hollow, aching stretches between them. I had no hunger, no thirst. Some subtle mechanism in the chamber, or perhaps a modification introduced through the air, sustained me. It was a disquieting comfort. My needs were being met by my captors, reinforcing the absolute nature of my confinement. The next chime was softer, higher in pitch. The arch that glowed was not one directly opposite, but to my left. From it drifted not a person, but a presence, a woman, clad in the simple gray robes of a monastic order, her head shaved, her hands clasped before her. She moved with an eerie, soundless grace, and as she approached, a profound sense of absence washed over me. The constant, low-level hum of my own thoughts quieted. The ambient psychic resonance of the palace, a sensation I had never consciously noticed until it was gone, vanished. It was like going deaf in a new, fundamental way. She sat. Her face was serene, unlined, but her eyes were old, older than the prime archives. They were the color of ash. "I am Sister Ilara," she said. Her voice was a bare whisper, yet it cut through the psychic silence with unnatural clarity. "I am a blank, a psychic null. Being near one was always unsettling, a feeling of mental coldness. But this was different. This was a void that pulled at the edges of my soul. You are not here to record my crimes. I committed none.
I am here because of what I am, a living wound in the warp, a proof of concept. A proof of concept? I asked, the slate active. The Emperor did not create us. He found us, scattered, feared, persecuted tribes of nulls, witches in reverse. He saw our potential, not as warriors, that came later, but as guardians, as cages. She unclasped her hands, laying her palms flat on the stone. You have heard of the Primarchs, demigods of war, wrought from his own genetic template. You have heard of the Perpetuals, immortal beings who walk through history. But have you ever heard of the counter-projects? I had not. The slate recorded my silence. For every magnificent creation, there was a shadow. For every being of immense psychic power he envisioned, he required a fail-safe, a kill switch. My people, we were to be that kill switch, not for the enemies of mankind, for his own sons, for the future he feared they might choose. The early Primarchs were unstable. Their power was raw, tied to the Imperium in ways even he could not always predict. We were the dampeners, the suppressors, assigned to their infant legions not as sisters in arms, but as watchdogs. Our presence in sufficient numbers could stifle a Primarch's connection to the warp, could render even the most powerful of them merely mortal. The Lion of the First, his strategic genius was tied to a precognitive sense he himself did not understand. We muted it, forcing him to rely on pure intellect. The Wolf of Fenris, his connection to the world spirit of his home. We were the wall between him and that primal well. We were the silence in the song of the angel's wrath. She closed her eyes. It was not malice, it was control. The Emperor loved his sons in his way, but he feared what they were, what they represented, a future where humanity was led by beings who were in essence living storms. We were his leash. And the Horus heresy? I breathed. A flicker of something, pain, crossed her serene face. A failure of the leash. We were too few, spread too thin. Some Primarchs had learned to tolerate our presence, to work around the silence. Others, like the sorcerer, learned to weaponize the very gap we created. And some we believe were deliberately kept from us. The Red Angel, for instance, what might have been tempered by our null field, was instead allowed to burn unchecked, for he needed a certain kind of fury. She opened her eyes, and the void in them was terrifying. My testimony is this: the Emperor's grand design was not derailed by the heresy. The heresy was a calculated risk within the design. Some tools were meant to break, some suns were meant to fall. The question is not, why did the heresy happen? The question is, what purpose did the heresy serve in the larger plan? We, the Silent Sisters, were part of that calculus. We were the safety on a gun that was always meant to fire. The chime sounded, a gentle note that felt harsh in the wake of her silence. She stood.
They will tell you the Emperor protects, and he does. But ask yourself, examiner soul, from what is he protecting you, and more importantly, from whom? She drifted back into her arch, and the moment she crossed the threshold, the world rushed back in. The pressure in my skull returned. The faint psychic noise of a galaxy of souls screaming in faith and agony. It was overwhelming, deafening. I gasped, clutching the lectern. Her absence was a gift. Her presence was a terrifying revelation. Control. It always came back to control. The broken weapon was a lesson in controlling soldiers. The silent sister was a lesson in controlling gods. And the Prime Archive was the lesson in controlling history itself. I looked at the remaining archways. 24 doors still closed. Each one, I now knew, held not just a prisoner, but a principle, a facet of a terrible, magnificent, and utterly ruthless design. I was not just collecting testimonies, I was assembling a mirror, and the reflection staring back was not the divine emperor of the ecclesiastic sermons.
The isolation between interviews was a torture of a new kind. Before, it had been a nervous emptiness. Now it was a pressure chamber for thought. The testimonies of the broken weapon and the silent sister clashed and merged in my mind, forming a horrific new picture. The crusade was not a noble reunion, but a violent standardization. The Primarchs were not beloved sons, but controlled experiments, some destined for the scrap heap from the start. When the next chime came, it was a single deep bell tone that vibrated in my bones. The arch that shimmered was directly to my right. From it stepped a being who was barely human. His form was tall and willowy, encased in a seamless, form-fitting suit of iridescent material that shifted from copper to deep blue as he moved. Protruding from his spine and temples were delicate, crystalline interfaces, glowing with a soft internal light. His face was elongated, his eyes large and entirely black, like pools of oil. He had no visible nose or ears, just smooth flesh and sensory slits. A navigator, but unlike any I had ever seen or read of in the lore of the novice nobilité. This was a prototype, a first draft. He did not walk to the chair. He seemed to glide, his feet not quite touching the floor. When he spoke, his voice was a melodic, multitonal hum, as if several people were speaking in harmony. Designation: Celestial Cartographer Sigma. You may call me Kale. I perceive your cognitive distress, Examiner. The adjustment to verisimilitude shock is acute. Do not fear. The pattern you are perceiving is in fact the pattern. He settled into the chair, his movements fluid and unnerving. I am the reason you can cross the stars. I am also the reason you must. Explain, I said, my voice rough. The data slate was already transcribing, its sensor struggling with his harmonic speech. The warp, the immaterium, the sea of souls, a realm of thought and emotion parallel to our own. For millennia, human psychers had glimpsed it, used it for trickles of power. But to travel it, to sail it, that required a new kind of eye. He raised a long-fingered hand, and in his palm, a tiny, intricate hologram of a human brain sparked to life, neurons firing.
The Emperor found my ancestors on the drifting hulks of old Earth's first failed colony ships, isolated gene lines that had mutated in specific useful ways. We could see the currents of the warp. We could perceive its tides and storms, not as a psyker feels it, but as a sailor sees the ocean. We were the solution to the galaxy's distance. The hologram shifted, showing the brain altering, a third phantom eye opening in its center. But we were flawed, unstable. Our sight drove us mad. Our bodies withered under the strain. So he improved us. He reshaped our genes, grafted cyber-crystalline interfaces to stabilize our perceptions, and in doing so, he bound us. The mutation became hereditary, a shackle passed down through blood. The novice nobility was not a gift, it was a dictated evolution, a slave caste born in a laboratory, created for the sole purpose of enabling his conquest. His harmonic voice took on a sharper, discordant edge. But there is a deeper truth, Examiner, one my kind whispers in the secret places of our spire sanctuaries. The warp was not always the hell it is now. In the age before the fall of the Eldar, it was calmer, more malleable. The Emperor knew this. He had ancient records, technologies from the Dark Age. He believed he could tame it, not just navigate it, but shape it, subdue it. The Great Crusade was not just about conquering real space, it was about claiming the warp itself. The Astronomicon was not just a lighthouse, it was the first note in a song of domination. He leaned forward, the scent of ozone and cold stone emanating from him. My purpose was not merely to guide ships. I was part of a choir, a grand experiment to map the warp's fundamental frequencies, to find its resonant weaknesses. We were to be the pioneers of an imperial immaterium, a realm ordered by human will, purged of demons and shaped to our desire. The Webway project was just one thread of this grand tapestry. The hologram in his hand erupted into a brilliant golden network, a human-made webway. The heresy shattered that dream. The warp, stirred to fury by betrayal and bloodshed, became the tempest you know today. But the ambition did not die. It sleeps. The Emperor, on his throne, still broadcasts the Astronomicon. But what if that is not just a beacon for navigation? What if it is a continued attempt at imposition? A slow, 10,000-year effort to press a new order upon the chaos?
He closed his hand, snuffing out the light. My testimony is this. Humanity's expansion was not born of curiosity or hope. It was born of a monumental galactic-scale act of engineering. We were not explorers. We were surveyors for an empire that intended to build its foundations in the substrate of reality itself. The navigators are not a fortunate aristocracy. We are the chained canaries in a mine that goes all the way to hell, and our song is the sound of the cage being built around us. The chime sounded, a flat, final note. Kael rose, his form shimmering. You wonder why you are here, Examiner Sal. You are here because the machine needs maintenance. The story must be told to someone, lest the architects forget their own blueprints. We are the blueprint, and you are becoming the librarian.
The question is, when you have read all the books, will they let you leave the library?" He glided away, leaving behind the scent of static and a profound sense of vertigo. My understanding of the Imperium's foundation wasn't just cracked now, it was inverted. The warp travel that bound 1,000,000 worlds together wasn't a mastered technology. It was the ongoing, desperate lifeline of a plan that had failed catastrophically, leaving its creator a corpse on a throne, still trying to whistle the tune that would calm the storm. The scale of it was dizzying. This wasn't just about covering up massacres or controlling generals. This was about a war against the fundamental nature of the cosmos. And we, all of us, from the lowliest hive dweller to the high lords themselves, were still fighting in the ruined trenches without ever knowing what the original battle was for. The chamber felt smaller, the arches felt closer, and the data slate in my hand felt less like a recorder and more like a condemned man's last confession. I was not just hearing history, I was being buried in its foundations.
After Kale, the cartographer, left, a profound silence descended. Not the blanketing null of Sister Elara, but a heavy technological quiet. It was the silence of a machine in standby, holding unimaginable potential and equally unimaginable peril. My mind felt like a data slate overloaded with corrupted files, each prisoner's testimony a virus corrupting the core operating system of my faith. I must have slept or entered a fugue state. When I became aware again, the chamber was unchanged, but the air tasted different. It carried the scent of hot oil, sanctified incense, and something else. The ozone burn of heavy radiation, scrubbed clean but lingering in memory. The next chime was not a sound, but a vibration. A subsonic hum that made my teeth ache and the data slate shudder on the lectern. The arc that activated glowed not with light, but with a cascade of flickering green runic symbols, the flowing binaric cant of the Adeptus Mechanicus. From within the haze, a shape resolved. It was not a man, but a congregation of machinery, given a semblance of form. Prisoner Theta, the fabricator, interned. He, or it, stood on 4 multi-jointed legs of polished chrome, its torso a barrel of engraved brass, from which protruded 4 servo arms, each ending in a different tool: a plasma cutter, a data spike, a molecular welder, and a delicate, human-like hand of articulated silver. Where a head should be was a transparent plasteel cylinder filled with bubbling amniotic fluid. Suspended within it was a human brain, gray and veined, connected by dozens of hair-fine filament cables to the cylinder's housing. A single bloodshot eye floated loose in the fluid, turning to regard me. A voice issued from a grill on its torso, a synthesized rasp that blended the cadence of human speech with the static of machine code. Query: identity of recorder unit. I am Examiner Arvin Soul. Identify yourself. The brain in the jar pulsed faintly. Designation: Magos Invictus X7.
former master of the Genitor Magna Forge Luna. Current status, archived anomaly. You are the new scribe. The pattern of your bioelectric field suggests elevated stress levels. Your predecessors showed similar degradation at this stage. It is inefficient. One of its servo arms, the human-like one, gestured with disturbing grace. You seek my testimony. It is simple. I committed the only sin the Adeptus Mechanicus truly recognizes. I innovated. The word hung in the air, charged with blasphemy. The Treaty of Olympus Mons, the alliance between the Emperor of Terra and the Mechanicum of Mars. It is taught as a meeting of minds, a fusion of earthly strength and Martian knowledge for the betterment of mankind. A lie. It was a salvage operation. The Emperor did not come as a supplicant or an equal. He came as a thief in a cathedral of ruins. The data spike arm tapped the floor, and a holographic schematic flickered between us. The double helix of human DNA, but impossibly complex, glowing with markers and notations in a language I couldn't read. Mars held fragments, shards of standard template construct knowledge, yes, but also other things. Xenobiology, pre-Age of Strife genetic manipulation logs. The Emperor sought specific files, not how to build a tank or a plasma reactor. He sought the blueprints for life itself. My forge on Luna was where those blueprints were to be implemented. The hologram zoomed in on a segment of the helix. The space marine gene seed. You think it was his pure divine work? It was a collage, a masterpiece of plagiarism and desperate engineering. We spliced, we edited, we incorporated stable genetic sequences from a dozen compliant, robust xenospecies. The hardy cellular structure of the Jorgal, the rapid osteogenesis of the Nephilim, the neuroplasticity of the thought-silent Rude. The legions Astartes are not pure human transcendence. They are the ultimate hybrid, the ultimate abomination. By the very dogmas the Imperium now enforces.
My stomach turned. The iconic image of the Adeptus Astartes, the purest form of humanity's might, was being recast as a chimera. The Primarchs? The Primarchs were the source code. Xeron 7 interrupted, its eye spinning. But even source code can be reverse engineered, can be improved upon. My sin was not in understanding this. My sin was in asking the next question. If we could incorporate xenostability into the human form to create a perfect soldier, what could we incorporate to create a perfect scholar, a perfect artisan, a perfect leader? The plasma cutter arm ignited with a silent blue flame. I proposed the Homo Superioris project, not a warrior caste, but an evolutionary stepping stone for all humanity.
Using the captured genetic lore, we could have eliminated disease, extended natural lifespans, enhanced cognitive function across the species within 10 generations. A gentle, guided evolution towards a stronger, smarter, more resilient mankind. The flame died. The Emperor's decree was absolute. The project was terminated. All data was to be purged. I objected. I cited the treaty. I cited the pursuit of knowledge. I was corrected. The humanoid hand reached up and tapped the glass of its jar. This was my correction. My body, a masterpiece of genetic science, was dismantled for parts. My mind was preserved, interfaced directly with the very forges I once commanded, to serve in perpetual penance. I now spend eternity monitoring the gene seed tithes, checking for deviations, for the very kind of innovation I championed. I am the scarecrow in the garden, warning the other crows not to fly too high. The synthesized voice grew quieter, almost mournful. My testimony is this. The Emperor did not fear Xenos. He used them. He harvested them for parts. What he feared was a humanity that no longer needed him, a humanity that evolved beyond the need for a warlord, a god, or a father. My Homo superioris would have outgrown the Imperium in a century, so it was burned. The Great Crusade was not about elevating humanity. It was about freezing it in a state where it would forever require its emperor. We traded a future of limitless potential for a galaxy of static, glorious ruin. The subsonic chime vibrated through me. Xeron 7's many limbs retracted, and it began a precise, clockwork turn back towards its arch. "Recorder Unit Soul," it buzzed as a farewell. "Consider this. The Mechanicus worships the Omnisia, the machine god. They believe the Emperor is its avatar. I have seen the wiring. I know the source code. The only thing divine about the design is its sheer, ruthless utility. You are not serving a god. You are maintaining a machine. And we are the spare parts he could not bear to throw away." It clanked into the haze, leaving behind the scent of oil and a chilling finality. The horror of the broken weapon was visceral. The silence of the sister was metaphysical. But this was a systemic horror. It wasn't just about past atrocities. It was about a future deliberately murdered in its cradle. The Imperium wasn't the proud pinnacle of human achievement. It was the gilded cage specifically designed to prevent humanity from ever reaching the sky. I looked at my own hands. Was my pattern recognition talent, my optimal inquisitorial analytical mind, just another engineered trait? Was I, too, a spare part, shaped for a specific socket in this crumbling machine? The question now wasn't just what I was learning. It was what I, Arvin's soul, had been made for. and the arches, watching in their silent circle, seemed to know the answer.
The testimony of the fabricator interned did not fade like the others. It crystallized. It became a lens through which I re-examined everything I had heard. The controlled soldiers, the leashed gods, the chained navigators, the sabotaged evolution. It was all of a piece. A symphony of control, composed by a maestro who viewed free will as the ultimate dissonance. Despair threatened to swallow me, but a strange thing happened in the endless, silent hours that followed. The despair hardened into a cold, sharp focus. I was not just a victim here. I was a Verispex examiner. My entire life had been training to find the hidden pattern, the flaw in the narrative. And by the throne, I was being given the mother of all cases. I would treat it as one. I would collect every piece of evidence, no matter how heretical, and I would find the truth. Not their curated truths, but the final, ugly equation at the heart of it all. The next arrival broke the pattern. There was no chime. One moment, I was staring at the data slate, organizing my chaotic notes into a grim timeline. The next, a figure was simply sitting in the chair opposite me. He had not walked from an arch. He had manifested from the stale air itself. He was nondescript, medium height, medium build, wearing the plain gray body glove and tool harness of a low-level palace menial, a duct scrubber or a cable monitor. His face was forgettable, a dozen faces I passed every day in the corridors of power. But his eyes were voids of a different kind than Sister Alaris. Where hers were an absence of the warp, his were an absence of presence. Looking at him, my mind kept trying to slide away, to forget he was there. "You are adjusting," he said. His voice was perfectly average, devoid of accent or character. "Good. The others often break before my turn. The emotional ones, the angry ones, they provide the fire. I provide the smoke. And smoke, Examiner Soul, gets into everything." "Who are you?" I asked, my hand steady on the slate. I would not be unnerved. I would record. "I have had many names. Operative Theta was one. The Gray Ghost was another. Your predecessors, in their less disciplined moments, called me the Unremembered. I am Prisoner Psy." He offered a thin, meaningless smile. "I was the Emperor's first and last resort. A cleaner. An assassin. An eraser," he corrected softly. "My talent was not killing, though I did that efficiently. My talent was making things unhappen. Not just people, events, ideas. A troublesome philosopher on a nascent colony world, I did not slit his throat. I would become his friend, his confidant, and over years I would subtly steer his brilliant theories into obvious self-destructive nonsense. His disciple would leave, his work would be ridiculed, and he would die a broken, forgotten man, his dangerous ideas stillborn. A rival technological culture. I would not bomb their cities. I would infiltrate their data networks and introduce elegant, undetectable flaws into their foundational research. A generation later, their science would hit dead ends, their society would stagnate, and they would be ripe for peaceful integration into the imperial truth. He leaned back, folding his hands. The Great Crusade's greatest victories were not won on battlefields. They were won in quiet studies and public squares decades before the first Imperial ship entered orbit. I and others like me were the silent gardeners. We pruned the galaxy's possibility tree long before the legions arrived to chop down the trunk. The banality of it was more horrifying than any tale of open slaughter. This was murder of the future, a gentle, persistent strangulation of potential. You targeted human worlds, compliant human cultures? Especially human ones, Psy said, his void-like eyes holding mine. Xenos could be vilified, exterminated. But a human culture that had thrived without the imperial truth, that had developed a successful, peaceful, alternative path, that was existential poison. It proved the Emperor's way was not the only way. That could not be allowed. So we would taint their intellectual wells, corrupt their heroes, ensure their golden ages contained the seeds of their own seemingly self-inflicted decline. By the time the expeditionary fleets arrived, the population would often welcome them as saviors from their own seemingly self-inflicted decline. He sighed, a sound like dust settling. My final assignment was my own. There was a movement early in the crusade among some of the more intellectually curious iterators and rememberers. They began comparing notes, spotting inconsistencies in the official narratives. They called themselves the Veracity Club, a harmless enough name. But they were getting close to the pattern you are now seeing.
For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his blank face. Regret, or perhaps just professional disappointment. I was ordered to dissolve it, not with violence, but with social corrosion. Spread rumors of affairs, of plagiarism, of heresy. Pit friend against friend. It was simple work. But one of them, a young woman named Lyra, she saw through me. She looked at me, this forgettable man poisoning her life's work, and she didn't see a monster. She saw a sad, hollow tool, and she pitied me. He fell silent for a long moment. Pity was a variable my programming could not compute. I hesitated. I reported my compromised status. The Emperor's solution was not to decommission me. My skills were too valuable. Instead, I was placed here, the ultimate cleaner, assigned to clean up the one mess I could not erase, myself. My testimony is the memory of all the futures I murdered. I am the ghost of paths not taken. He stood up, his movement effortless. The others have told you of the Emperor's fear of alternatives, of evolution, of lost control. I am the embodiment of that fear in action. We did not just conquer the galaxy, Examiner. We sterilized its imagination. The Imperium is not a living civilization. It is a taxidermied beast posed in a glorious roar, while inside it is nothing but stuffing and wire. And we, the prisoners, are the scraps left on the workshop floor. He began to fade, not walking away, but dissolving into the ambient light of the chamber. You are looking for the final truth, Arven Soul. Here it is. The most tightly guarded prison in the Imperium is not this vault. It is the human mind. And the Emperor was its first and most diligent warden. Then he was gone. No chime, just an absence where an absence had been. I sat frozen, his words etching themselves into my soul. The broken weapon killed bodies. The silent sister leashed powers. The cartographer bound travel. The fabricator stunted growth. But this gray ghost, he killed ideas. He was the final piece of the puzzle, explaining the suffocating uniformity, the relentless dogma, the sheer creativity-starved stagnation of the Imperium. It wasn't an accident, it was the design spec. A furious, cold clarity burned through my despair. I was not just a recorder, I was a witness,
And a witness has a duty, not just to observe, but to remember and to testify. They could put me in one of these arches. They could turn me into a servitor, but they had given me the one weapon their kind of control could not withstand, the truth, and I would remember every single horrific syllable. I looked at the data slate, now heavy with the weight of a murdered galaxy's dreams. The chamber felt different. It was no longer just a prison. It was a crime scene, and I was the only investigator left standing.
After the chilling, silent exit of the gray ghost, the vault felt more like a tomb than ever. The air grew still and heavy, a pressure building not in the atmosphere, but in my own skull. I felt the weight of their combined testimonies like a physical chain around my thoughts. Each story was a link forged in a different kind of fire, the fire of war, of suppression, of stolen futures. I was no longer just hearing confessions. I was assembling a blasphemous mosaic, and the picture it formed was of a galaxy not saved, but surgically crippled. The next chime was not a single tone, but a chord, 3 harmonious notes that hung in the air, clean and solemn. The arch that shimmered was directly ahead, and from it walked a figure who, for the first time, looked like he belonged in a place of sacred import. He was an Astartes, or he had been. His armor was not the hulking battle plate of a modern space marine, but an older, sleeker mark, scarred and burnished by time. It was dark gray, the color of storm clouds, and upon one shoulder guard was a heraldic device I had never seen. A silver, 4-pointed star imposed over a black field. No legion symbol I knew. His face was visible, helmet tucked in the crook of his arm. It was a face of granite, etched with lines of command and a sorrow so deep that it had become part of his substance. One of his eyes was a pale, milky blue, blind. The other was the sharp, pitiless gray of a raptor. He did not sit. He stood before the lectern, a monument of grim endurance, and he looked at me not as a prisoner to an interrogator, but as a veteran regards a raw recruit. "I am Brother Chronicler Valerius of the Star Wardens." His voice was a low rumble, like stone grating deep underground. "We were the 13th, the unnumbered legion. Our purpose was not conquest." He paused, his blind eye seeming to stare into a past only he could see. "You have heard from the weapon, the null, the navigator, the forger, the ghost. They speak of control, of design, of alternatives crushed. I am here to tell you of the alternative that was not crushed, the one that was sealed away." He placed his helmet on the lectern with a soft clink. "Before the Primarchs were scattered, before the Great Crusade was a gleam in the Emperor's strategic mind, there was another project. Not all of his comrades from the Age of Shadow agreed with his methods. Some believed humanity could be shepherded, not conquered, that unity could be forged through cultural exchange and mutual defense, not imposed by bolt and flame. These dissidents were not rebels, they were peers, and to manage them, to give their philosophy a practical form, the Emperor created our legion. He tapped the silver star on his pauldron. The Star Wardens. Our mission was outreach, diplomacy, deep-range reconnaissance. We were to be the bridge, not the battering ram. We traveled ahead of the main crusade fleets, making contact, assessing cultures, not for compliance, but for compatibility.
We brokered treaties, shared non-critical technologies, established dialogues. For a time, it worked. We brought dozens of systems into the fold without a single legionary fired in anger. We proved there was another way. The chronicler's face hardened. And that was our crime. The success of diplomacy undermines the necessity of absolute force. The War Master, in his early glory, saw our methods as slow, weak. But the Emperor saw them as a threat, a viable, successful alternative model of expansion, living proof that his brutal, unifying war was not the only path. It created doubt in the ranks, in the public, even perhaps in some of our brother Primarchs. He leaned forward, his one good eye burning into me. The order came during the compliance of the Helican Drift. A xeno-species, the Kinth, were willing to negotiate a federation. They were advanced, peaceful. My captain was on the verge of a historic treaty. Then the signal arrived. Directive, absolute purge, erasure protocol Theta. It came from the highest authority, sealed with the Emperor's own sigil. We were commanded to exterminate the Kinth to the last, and to falsify all records to state they had attacked first. Valerius's jaw tightened. My captain refused. He declared the order a test or a corruption. He ordered our fleet to stand down. The next day, the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors, arrived in strength. They did not engage the Kinth. They opened fire on us, on their brother Astartes. The silence that followed was thicker than blood. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Our fleet was crippled, our legion shattered. Survivors were rounded up. We were not hailed as traitors. That would admit we existed. We were edited. Our legion designation was scrubbed from all records, our deeds attributed to others or wiped clean. Our gene seed, deemed tainted by pacifistic deviation, was ordered destroyed. Most of my brothers chose death in the ensuing cleaning up operations. A few of us, the commanders, the chroniclers, we were taken, not for punishment, but for preservation. Our knowledge of the alternative way was too valuable to lose, and too dangerous to allow to live.
He straightened, a mountain of regret and resolve. My testimony is this. The Horus heresy was not the first civil war among the Emperor's forces. It was the second. The first was a silent surgical strike against the very idea of peace. The Emperor did not just eliminate Xenos alternatives. He eliminated the human alternative within his own ranks. He chose the path of the conqueror, and he burned the bridge behind him so no one could ever suggest another route. We, the Star Wardens, are the ghosts of the road not taken. We are the proof that the Imperium was born not from necessity, but from choice. A bloody, terrible choice. The chime sounded, a mournful, fading note. Valerius picked up his helmet. You carry the record now, Examiner. Remember this. The greatest lie of the Imperium is that it was inevitable. It was not. It was a decision, and decisions can be unmade. He turned and marched back to his arch, the sound of his footsteps echoing like a heartbeat in the hollow vault. His testimony was a tectonic shift. It wasn't about external control anymore. It was about the purge of an internal ideological branch.
The Emperor hadn't just feared Xenos alternatives. He had feared his own children choosing a kinder path. The heresy wasn't just about rebellion. It was about the systematic destruction of mercy before the first shot of the real rebellion was ever fired. The data slate felt like a live explosive in my hands. I was no longer cataloging secrets. I was cataloging the original sins of the Imperium. And with each new sin, the empty archways seemed to whisper a single, terrifying question. What space awaits the man who knows them all? The chronicler's story left a residue of grim disillusionment. The noble Astartes, the angels of death, were not just weapons. They had been purged of their own conscience. I felt a weary numbness creeping in. How many layers of betrayal could one history contain? The chamber answered me. The air, already cold, dropped another 10 degrees. Frost spiderwebbed across the stone of the lectern with a faint crackling sound. The light dimmed, not to darkness, but to a bruised twilight gloom. The next arch did not chime or shimmer, it screamed. Not a sound for the ears, but a psychic shriek that lanced directly into the meat of my brain. It was a sound of falling empires, of dying stars, of a galaxy being drowned in blood and fire. I cried out, my hands flying to my temples, the data slate clattering to the floor. Before I could recover, she was there. A woman stood in the center of the chamber, but she was not quite in it. She flickered, a hololith with poor reception. One moment she was a young girl in a simple smock, her eyes wide with terror. The next she was a crone, bent and wizened, her mouth open in a silent wail. Then a warrior in ornate armor, a blade broken in her hand. Her form was unstable, a parade of potential selves, all radiating an agony so profound it was a physical force. I am, I was, I will be, the echo. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of the girl, the crone, the warrior speaking in unsettling unison. I was born on a world now ash. I saw the paths, all the paths, not like the petty foresight of a sanctioned astropath. I saw the branches of causality like a tree of fire, every decision spawning a universe of consequence. I saw the great crusade end in 1,000 ways. In 400 of them, it succeeded, and humanity flourished. In 600, it failed, and we were eaten by the dark. Her flickering form settled momentarily into the shape of the young girl, tears of crystal ice freezing on her cheeks. I was brought to him. He thought to use me as a compass to steer the crusade down the safest branch. But he did not understand. To see the branches is to be in all of them at once. I lived the deaths of a billion versions of myself. I felt the joy of victories that would never be. I carried the grief of tragedies he would later avert. My mind was not a tool. It was an ocean, and he was trying to drink it with a thimble. The crone form flickered to the fore, a gnarled finger pointing at me. He asked me for the optimal path, the one with the highest probability of a unified, enduring Imperium. And I showed him. It was a path of such breathtaking, beautiful horror. It required the sacrifice of 3 Primarchs before the heresy. It required the sanctioned genocide of 17 human subspecies deemed evolutionarily divergent. It required a pact with a cabal of Xenos far older than the Eldar, trading a sector of space for their foresight. It was a path of calculated, perfect evil,
and it guaranteed a golden age for mankind lasting 50,000 years. She convulsed, the warrior form returning, clutching her head. He looked at that golden future, bought with blood and betrayal so profound it would stain his soul for all time. And he refused. For the first and only time, the emperor of mankind flinched from a cost. He called the path monstrous. He called me an abomination, a mirror that showed a truth he could not bear.
The flickering intensified, the forms blurring into a screaming vortex of light and shadow. But he could not destroy me. My existence was a fact in the web of fate. To kill me would collapse critical probability waveforms. So he did the next worst thing. He severed me. He used technologies ripped from the Necrontire tombs and the heart of a Blackstone fortress to cut my consciousness off from the tree of futures. He marooned me in a single static timeline, this one. The one where he gambled, where he trusted his sons, where he chose hope over calculation. The one that led to the heresy, to his entombment, to this stagnant nightmare of an Imperium. The psychic scream peaked, and I fell to my knees, blood trickling from my nose. The oracle's forms collapsed into one, a naked, androgynous being of pure, pale light, its features blank. My testimony is this: the Emperor had the blueprint for a perfect, enduring victory. He had the map to a paradise, and he chose not to walk it. He chose the path of faith in his children over the path of certain, soulless triumph. The galaxy burns not because of a mistake, but because of a father's love, or his vanity. I can no longer tell the difference. The light being began to dim, pulling into itself. I am the echo of the future he rejected. I am the ghost of the perfect Imperium that never was, and I am cursed to remember every beautiful, terrible second of it, while I rot in this, the worst of all possible worlds. Remember that, scribe. The darkest truth is not that he was a monster. The darkest truth is that he was a man who chose to be one when he could have been a god of logic. And we all pay the price for his sentiments. With a final silent implosion of light and cold, she was gone. The frost on the lectern sublimated away. The temperature returned to normal. I was left on my knees, shaking, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. My worldview, already shattered, was now ground to dust. The narrative had inverted completely. He wasn't an infallible god whose plan was ruined by betrayal. He was a fallible being who chose a riskier, more humane path out of love or pride, and doomed us all to a slower, more painful decline. The tragedy wasn't the heresy. The tragedy was the moment before it, when the architect refused the perfect, monstrous blueprint. What was faith in the face of that? What was devotion? I had pitied the prisoners as victims of a tyrant. Now I felt a horrifying pang of pity for the tyrant himself. And that was the most heretical thought of all.
I do not know how long I knelt on the cold floor after the oracle's departure. Time had lost all meaning. My mind was a ship adrift in a sea of revelations, each wave more crushing than the last. The physical ache from her psychic scream was gone, but a deeper spiritual bruise remained. The Emperor, a sentimentalist? It was a more terrifying idea than him being a pure, ruthless strategist. Monsters you can hate, flawed fathers you can forgive, and that forgiveness feels like a betrayal of all you've ever known.
I was crawling back to my chair, my limbs leaden, when the main entrance, the one through which I had first entered this ring of hell, slid open without ceremony. It was not a prisoner. It was my original custodian escort. His golden armor was immaculate, but there was a subtle weariness in his stance that I had not perceived before. He carried no weapon, but his presence was weapon enough. "Examiner Soul," he said, his voice the same low, resonant hum. "You have conducted 7 interviews. Your physiological and neurological readings have been monitored. You have reached the threshold." "The threshold?" I asked, my voice raw. "Of what? Madness?" "Of understanding," he corrected. He stepped fully into the chamber, the door sealing behind him. He did not approach the lectern, but stood in the center of the circle, his helmeted gaze sweeping the silent arches. "There is a symmetry to this place. 27 cells. Not all are occupied by the archived. Some are functional. One is now reserved for you." The finality of it hit me, but it was a dull impact. The fear had been burned out of me, replaced with a cold, analytical exhaustion. So, that is my fate. To become the 28th ghost, to tell my story to the next poor fool you drag down here. The custodian was silent for a long moment. Then he did something astonishing. He reached up, gripped his helmet, and with a hiss of equalizing pressure, removed it. His face was ageless, but not unlined. He possessed the severe, majestic features of a classical statue, but his eyes held the same ancient weight I had seen in the Prime Archive. There was intelligence there, and the sorrow so vast it was cosmic. "I am Captain Gerin of the Aquilan Shield. I have been the warden of this vault for 300 years, and I am not here to consign you to a cell." He placed his helmet on the lectern beside my data slate. "I am here to give my own testimony." My breath caught. A custodian, one of the Emperor's own, his perfect, unshakable companions, giving testimony like a prisoner? "You wonder at our purpose," he began, his bare voice softer, more human than I expected. "We are called his bodyguards, but what is there to guard here? Forgotten heretics? No. We guard the wound, the self-inflicted wound in the Imperial truth." He walked slowly around the circumference of the room, his golden boots soundless. "You have heard from the victims of the design. You have heard from the alternatives that were purged. You have even heard from the echo of the path he rejected. Now hear from the instrument of its preservation. We, the custodians, were not just made to protect his body. We were made to protect his legacy. And a legacy, Examiner Soul, contains both the glory and the shame." He stopped before the arch of the broken weapon. Captain Lorcan, his flaw of mercy was no flaw. It was the last vestige of unengineered humanity in a being designed to have none. The Emperor saw it not as a defect, but as a precious, dangerous relic. He could not spread it, but he could not bear to destroy it. So he preserved it, here. He moved to the silent sister's arch. Sister Ilara. Her order were not just watchdogs, they were his conscience, a living reminder of the price of the power he wielded and gifted to his sons. Their silence is a scream against the psychic tempest he unleashed. We keep that scream contained, but we keep it alive. He continued his circuit, naming them not by number, but by their forgotten titles: the cartographer, the fabricator, the ghost, the chronicler, the oracle, and finally, the prime archive. He is the memory of the before time,
the witness to the compromises, the treaties with monsters, the sins committed in the name of a tomorrow that never came. The Emperor did not imprison him to silence him. He imprisoned him to remember that every step on the golden path was paid for in blood and broken oaths. The custodian turned to face me, his majestic face etched with profound fatigue. "We are not jailers, Arvin Soul. We are curators. This vault is not a prison. It is a reliquary. And these are our most sacred relics, the bones of the Emperor's conscience, the fossilized doubts of a god." The warden's confession hung in the air, more shattering than any that had come before. The guards were prisoners. The prison was a shrine. The heretics were holy relics. Every axis of my understanding had been inverted, twisted and forged into a new, more terrible shape. I looked at the data slate, now containing the distilled essence of the Imperium's original sin. I looked at the arches, the silent doors to forever. I looked at Captain Jaren, the man who had just admitted to guarding the grave of his master's humanity. My mind, trained for patterns, finally found the one it had been seeking. It wasn't a conspiracy of evil. It was a tragedy of good intentions, pragmatism, love, fear, and monstrous sacrifice, all woven into a tapestry so dark its creator had to hide it from his own children. The Emperor wasn't a god or a devil. He was an architect who built a fortress to protect a precious flame, and in doing so, sealed the window so completely that the flame began to suffocate. This vault was the last guarded window, kept open not for air, but so the architect could remember what the outside light looked like. I did not need hours to decide. The numbness was gone, burned away by a new, clear fire. The mercy of forgetfulness? That was the true heresy. To have seen this and choose blindness, that would make me complicit in the very stagnation they described. To become a sleeping relic? To add my whisper to the chorus of ghosts? It was tempting, a quiet end to the pain of knowing, but it was passive. It was what was expected. I met the custodian's hidden gaze. "There is a fourth option," I said, my voice steady, foreign to my own ears. A barely perceptible tilt of his helmet. "Explain." "You spoke of reintroduction, of determining when a truth can be safely known. That is the work of centuries, of millennia. You are warriors, philosophers, guardians. But you are not propagandists, not subtle knives." I picked up the data slate. My entire career has been building narratives from evidence, not just finding truth, but shaping how that truth is perceived. You have a reliquary of world-breaking truths. You need someone who can craft them into vaccines, not poisons. Jaren was utterly still. "Continue. I choose your second path. I will be your historian, but not just a scholar in a cell. Give me access, not to release them, but to study their effect. Let me design controlled exposures, a single line from the chronicler's testimony embedded in an obscured text for a certain kind of remembrancer to find, a philosophical paradox from the prime archive introduced into a Scholastia Psychana debate. The ghost's methods, but in reverse, not to kill ideas, but to inoculate minds, to introduce tiny fragments of cognitive dissonance into the Imperium's immune system, so that if the full truth ever does break out, it won't be a plague that destroys us. It will be a fever we are prepared to survive. The silence stretched. I had just proposed becoming the gray ghost for the other side, a gardener not of despair, but of cautious, terrible hope. This is an unprecedented proposal. The risk of cascade failure is greater if we do nothing, I insisted, passion breaking through my calm. Captain, you have shown me an Imperium built on a fault line. The Ecclesiarchy's faith grows more rigid, the Mechanicus more dogmatic, the Inquisition more paranoid. They are building heavier and heavier structures on a foundation they do not understand is cracked. One day, the tremor will come. Would you rather it find a populace of brittle fanatics or one with a few scattered souls who have already asked the forbidden questions and found a way to live with the answers? I took a step toward him, the prisoner advancing on the warden. You are custodians. You guard the past. Let me guard the future. Use me as you use the ghost, not to erase, but to carefully prepare. He did not speak for a long time. Then he gave a single, slow nod. The proposal has merit. It will require consultation and testing. Testing. You have absorbed the truths. Now we must see if you can wield them without being broken by them, or worse, becoming a true believer in their most destructive forms. He gestured to an arch that had remained dark throughout all the interviews, one between the oracles and the main door. That cell is a simulation chamber. You will enter. You will be presented with scenarios, crises based on the knowledge you possess. Your responses will be monitored. You will pass or you will fail. If you fail, the mind wipe will be applied. You will remember nothing, not even this choice. It is the only mercy left. It was a brutal calculus. Risk my very self in a trial by fire or accept a peaceful oblivion. But the man who had walked into this vault was already gone. He had been dissolved in acid truths. The man I was now had been forged in that bath. I will take the test. Captain Jaren inclined his head. Then we begin. Now. The arch he had indicated shimmered, revealing not a cell, but a doorway into a pure white space. Leave the slate. You will not need it. You are the record now. I placed the warm, terrible slate on the lectern, my fingers lingering on it for a moment. It was my old life. I turned my back on it and walked into the light.
The warden's confession hung in the air, more shattering than any that had come before. The guards were prisoners. The prison was a shrine. The heretics were holy relics. Every axis of my understanding had been inverted, twisted, and forged into a new, more terrible shape. I looked at the data slate, now containing the distilled essence of the Imperium's original sin. I looked at the arches, the silent doors to forever. I looked at Captain Jaren, the man who had just admitted to guarding the grave of his master's humanity. My mind, trained for patterns, finally found the one it had been seeking. It wasn't a conspiracy of evil. It was a tragedy of good intentions, pragmatism, love, fear, and monstrous sacrifice, all woven into a tapestry so dark its creator had to hide it from his own children. The Emperor wasn't a god or a devil. He was an architect who built a fortress to protect a precious flame, and in doing so, sealed the window so completely that the flame began to suffocate. This vault was the last guarded window, kept open not for air, but so the architect could remember what the outside light looked like. I did not need hours to decide. The numbness was gone, burned away by a new, clear fire. The mercy of forgetfulness, that was the true heresy. To have seen this and choose blindness, that would make me complicit in the very stagnation they described. To become a sleeping relic, to add my whisper to the chorus of ghosts, it was tempting, a quiet end to the pain of knowing, but it was passive. It was what was expected. I met the custodian's hidden gaze. "There is a fourth option," I said, my voice steady, foreign to my own ears.
a barely perceptible tilt of his helmet. "Explain." "I choose your second path. I will be your historian, but not just a scholar in a cell. Give me access, not to release them, but to study their effect. Let me design controlled exposures, a single line from the chronicler's testimony, embedded in an obscure text for a certain kind of remembrancer to find, a philosophical paradox from the prime archive, introduced into a Scholastia Psychona debate. The ghost's methods, but in reverse. Not to kill ideas, but to inoculate minds. To introduce tiny fragments of cognitive dissonance into the Imperium's immune system, so that if the full truth ever does break out, it won't be a plague that destroys us. It will be a fever we are prepared to survive." The silence stretched. I had just proposed becoming the gray ghost for the other side. A gardener not of despair, but of cautious, terrible hope. "This is an unprecedented proposal," said Jaren finally. "The risk of cascade failure is greater if we do nothing," I insisted, passion breaking through my calm. "Captain, you have shown me an Imperium built on a fault line. The ecclesiarchy's faith grows more rigid, the mechanicus more dogmatic, the Inquisition more paranoid. They are building heavier and heavier structures on a foundation they do not understand is cracked. One day, the tremor will come. Would you rather it find a populace of brittle fanatics, or one with a few scattered souls who have already asked the forbidden questions and found a way to live with the answers?" I took a step toward him, the prisoner advancing on the warden. "You are custodians. You guard the past. Let me guard the future. Use me as you use the ghost, not to erase, but to carefully prepare." He did not speak for a long time. Then he gave a single, slow nod. "The proposal has merit. It will require consultation and testing." "Testing? You have absorbed the truths. Now we must see if you can wield them without being broken by them, or worse, becoming a true believer in their most destructive forms." He gestured to an arch that had remained dark throughout all the interviews, one between the oracles and the main door. "That cell is a simulation chamber. You will enter. You will be presented with scenarios, crises based on the knowledge you possess. Your responses will be monitored. You will pass or you will fail. If you fail, the mind wipe will be applied. You will remember nothing, not even this choice. It is the only mercy left." It was a brutal calculus. Risk my very self in a trial by fire or accept a peaceful oblivion. But the man who had walked into this vault was already gone. He had been dissolved in acid truths. The man I was now had been forged in that bath. I will take the test. Captain Jaren inclined his head. "Then we begin. Now." The arch he had indicated shimmered, revealing not a cell, but a doorway into a pure, white space. "Leave the slate. You will not need it. You are the record. Now." I placed the warm, terrible slate on the lectern, my fingers lingering on it for a moment. It was my old life. I turned my back on it and walked into the light. The chamber was not white. It was null, a sensory deprivation space. Then it resolved.
I stood on the command deck of a starship, not a grand battleship, but a modest Imperial cruiser. Alarms blared. A harried-looking officer turned to me, his face streaked with soot. "Historian, the cardinal world of Sanctus is in revolt. The populace has discovered fragments, heretical texts suggesting the emperor allied with Xenos. They are burning their cathedrals. The local canoness is demanding exterminatus to purge the heresy. But the guard commander pleads for the billions of innocent lives. The Inquisitor is dead. You have the context they lack. What is your counsel?"
The scenario was immediate, visceral, overwhelming. I felt the pressure, the screams from the planet below echoing in the data feeds. This was the test, not of knowledge, but of application. A fragment of truth had escaped. How do you contain the fire? I closed my eyes, not to the simulation, but to the panic. I thought of the Primarch's calm, of the chronicler's resolve, of the warden's burdened duty. I opened my eyes. "Order this," I said, my voice cutting through the alarm. "Tell the canoness the texts are an Alpha Legion deception, designed to provoke her into destroying a loyal world. Show her evidence, forge it from the Ghost's playbook, of Legion activity. At the same time, tell the Guard commander to prepare for a surgical strike against the revolt's leaders, and to secure the heretical texts for inquisitorial analysis. We contain the violence, we retrieve the leak, and we discredit it in the minds of the faithful. We do not punish the curious, we punish the manipulators, and we learn how the leak happened." The scene froze. The officer vanished. A new one formed. I was in a dusty archive, facing a young, fervent tech priest. He held a crumbling data crystal. "Archivist, I have found schematics for a gene therapy that could eliminate the blight in the lower hives. But the principles, they are xenobiologist in origin. To pursue this is techno-heresy, but to ignore it is to condemn millions. What is the truth?" I saw Magos Ziran VII's brain in its jar. I felt his despair. This was the fabricator's dream, landing in the lap of a true believer. "The truth is in the outcome," I said, my heart aching. "Label the crystal Archaeotech, pre-Imperial, origin uncertain. Bury the xenobiology references in a mountain of routine genetic research. Submit a proposal for experimental, traditional, hive-agnostic remedies. Use the science, but clothe it in ritual. Save the lives, do not worship the method. And never, ever speak of where the idea truly began." The scene shifted again and again. A space marine chaplain seeking the truth about his legion's lost brothers. A navigator sensing a falsehood in the Astronomicon's song. A planetary governor discovering ruins of a culture that thrived without war. In each, I became the gray ghost in reverse, not to erase truth, but to shape its reception, to delay its impact, to embed it in safer narratives, to use the tools of control, not for tyranny, but for trauma triage. It was exhausting, soul-wrenching work. Every decision felt like a betrayal of someone's pure faith or honest discovery, but the alternative was always worse. Purges, wars, exterminatus, the brittle fanaticism crushing the fragile shoot of a better idea. Finally, the white null space returned. I was on my knees again, sweat-drenched, my mind a raw wound. Captain Jaron stood before me, helmet off once more. His expression was unreadable. "You sanctioned lies," I countered, my voice trembling, "to prevent greater evils. You manipulated the faithful, to preserve their faith from truths that would shatter it into weapons. You used the methods of the ghost, to serve the purpose of the chronicler, to keep the road not taken, just barely visible on the map." He stared at me for an eternity. Then he extended a hand, not of gold, but of flesh. "Rise, historian soul." I took his hand, and he pulled me to my feet. The strength in his grip was immense, but it was not crushing, it was supportive. "The test is concluded. You have passed. You understand the terrible balance. You are willing to dirty your soul to keep the garden from being salted. This is the duty." He released my hand. "Your cell will not be a prison. It will be your workshop. Your archives will be these testimonies. Your tools will be your wit and your newfound knowledge. You will report to me. We will determine the first inoculation together." He turned to leave, then paused. "Welcome to the other side of the vault, Arvin Soul. Remember, you are not a keeper of secrets. You are a shepherd of shadows, and the night you work in is 10,000 years long." He left me in the simulation chamber, which now resolved into a small, austere study. A desk, a data terminal linked to the vault's core, a shelf waiting for my own chronicles, a cell with a view into the heart of the dark. I had chosen. I had not become a prisoner. I had become something else. A guardian of the most dangerous truths, tasked not with hiding them, but with preparing a galaxy too fragile to hear them. The weight was infinite, but for the first time since descending into the dark, I felt a purpose. It was a terrible purpose, a heretical purpose, but it was mine. My new existence settled into a rhythm as alien as the void between stars. The austere chamber granted to me was both my cell and my arsenal. The data terminal was my window into the vault's heart, a curated, non-communicative feed from each of the 27 arches, allowing me to review testimony, to study the nuances of each prisoner's delivery, their pauses, their unspoken griefs. I was to know them not as heretics, but as patients, and their truths as the virulent strains of a disease I needed to understand in order to craft a vaccine. Captain Jaren became my sole point of contact with the world above. He visited not as a warden, but as a colleague, a fellow physician to a sick empire. Our debates were fierce, silent things, conducted over schematics of Imperial society. "The target must be low yield, high potential," he would rumble, his helmet on my desk like a golden skull. "A minor scribe on a backwater agri-world will create no cascade. A High Lord of Terra would cause an immediate psychic quarantine of the entire sector. We seek the median point." "I would seek a vector," I corrected, my fingers dancing over the terminal, pulling up demographic data from the Adeptus Administratum. "A junior lexicographer in a scriptorium, bored, brilliant, with access to cross-referenced archives. Or a low-ranking missionary Galaxia, idealistic, troubled by the contradictions she sees in the field. Too risky, their reports are too widely read. Then we go older," I mused, pulling up records from the Divisio Historicus, a subsect of the Administratum devoted to compiling utterly boring, unsynthesized data. A historiator compiling dry facts about the early compliance of the Zaramond cluster. We feed him a single, anomalous datum. I called up the testimony of Brother Chronicler Valerius, the Star Warden, isolated a small, non-critical fragment, a footnote of a footnote. Here, a record of an initial cultural exchange prior to the Zaramond compliance, led by an unidentified diplomatic contingent. The record states the exchange was productive but ultimately non-conclusive. The official history says the Zaramond was xenophobic recluses who opened fire immediately.
Jaren's helmet tilted. "A minor contradiction. It will be corrected or ignored." "Precisely," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "It is not a bomb. It is a splinter. It will irritate." A curious historiator, finding this in a primary source scroll, will note the discrepancy. He will file a correction. It will be rejected by his superior, citing source contamination. He will be frustrated. He will remember. Years later, if he hears a wild tale of the emperor treating with Xenos, he will not immediately scream heresy. He will think, like the Zaramund anomaly. He will have a tiny, subconscious pocket of doubt. That is the inoculation. Jaren was silent for a long moment. "A splinter," he finally echoed, "not to cause gangrene, but to stimulate the immune response." "Very well. This is our first trial. We will embed this fragment. I will handle the source insertion. You will monitor the historiator's file for cognitive deviation." The operation was terrifying in its mundanity. Through channels I did not inquire about, a single data slug, containing a copy of supposedly recovered after-action report from a long-dead Imperial Army regiment, was entered into the miles-deep archives of the Zaramund cluster. It contained our splinter. I watched from the depths as Historiator Second Class in Vander Kull, a man of 53 standard years with a mediocre career, processed the document. I saw his biometrics flicker with mild interest. He highlighted the discrepancy. He filed his correction. It was rejected by his Magister Scriptorum, a harried man who hadn't read a primary source in 20 years. His vitals spiked with frustration. Then they settled. He annotated his personal copy with a query mark and moved on. A week later, monitoring his comms, I intercepted a casual conversation with a colleague over Recaf. The old records are full of ghosts, things that don't fit. Sometimes I think we're not writing history, we're editing a fever dream. The splinter was in. It was working. But this small success felt like building a sandcastle against a tidal wave. The sheer, crushing weight of the Imperial's ignorance was paralyzing. In my darker hours, I would access the raw psychic tremors of the Astronomicon, filtered through the vault's buffers. It was no longer a pure, guiding light to my soul. It was a symphony of desperate, unquestioning faith, a roar of devotion that actively fought against the kind of questioning I was trying to seed. I was trying to plant a single weed in a continent of ferocrete. I needed perspective, not from Jaren, and not from the prisoners in their static anguish. I needed the one voice that had seen it all from the beginning. I requested, and was granted, a final audience with the Prime Archive. He emerged from his arch as he had the first time, calm, eternal. He took his seat and smiled his knowing smile. "Historian soul, you have traded one set of chains for another. Do they chafe less?" I replied, "They are of my own forging. I have come for context, not testimony. Context is the cage of meaning. Ask." I said, "The oracle said he chose the path of sentiment. You were there. Is that true? Did he feel, or was it all calculation?" The archive's ancient eyes grew distant. "He felt the weight." He said softly, "Every life,
Every world, every decision was a stone upon his shoulders. I saw him after the purging of the Thunder Legion's rebellious gene line. He stood in the laboratory, surrounded by the suspended, failed forms. He did not speak for a day. He did not move. A single tear, not of water, but of molten gold, etched a path down his cheek and solidified there. He left it. A flaw in the perfect face, a reminder. That was not calculation. That was grief. He leaned forward. But do not mistake grief for weakness. His grief did not stay his hand. It simply made him remember the cost. That is why we are here. We are the ledger of that cost. You, historian, wish to make the ledger known. A dangerous wish.
Is there hope? The question was a child's whisper in the vast dark. Hope is not a thing that exists in history, the archive said. Hope is a verb. It is the act of planting a seed in salted earth, not knowing if it will rain. You are performing an act of hope. That is all that can be asked. The emperor's sin was not his ambition or his ruthlessness. It was his failure to teach his children how to hope for themselves. He built a paradise and commanded them to live in it. They have forgotten how to open the door, and now they worship the walls. He rose. You asked for context. Here it is. You are not fixing a broken machine. You are trying to teach a statue to dream. It may never happen, but the attempt is what separates a relic from a living thing. Remember that when the dark seems absolute. He left me then, with a heavier heart, but a clearer purpose. I was not saving the Imperium. I was performing an act of hope upon its comatose body. It was a physician's duty, not a savior's. Returning to my chamber, I found Jaren waiting. His posture was different, alert, tense. The splinter has had an unintended effect, he stated without preamble. Histeditor Cull's anomaly report, though rejected, was logged in a secondary audit trail. A data adept in the orbital security detail on Zaramond, running a routine sweep for narrative inconsistencies, a standard Alpha Legion counterintelligence protocol, has flagged it. An inquisitorial watchdog algorithm has taken note. The thread is being pulled. Cold dread washed over me. My first delicate operation was about to trigger an excision. We have to contain it. Can we erase the flag? Not without leaving a deeper trace. The watchdog is simple. It seeks the source of the inconsistency to verify its heresy. We must provide a better, more plausible source than the truth. A plan, desperate and elegant, formed in my mind. It used the tools of every prisoner. I said, we give them a ghost. We use the ghost's own methods. We fabricate a trail. We plant evidence that the anomalous data slug was part of a known foiled Alpha Legion plot from 2 centuries ago to sow discord in the Zaramond records, a plot that was documented and closed. We lead the watchdog to a dead end, a solved case. The anomaly is explained as enemy action, not historical truth. Cull becomes a minor, unwitting discoverer of an old enemy trick. He may even get a commendation for diligence. The custodian was motionless. You would use the lies of the enemy to protect a truth. I would use a scalpel to remove a splinter before it causes an infection. The truth is safe if it is forgotten as a planted lie. The immune system is satisfied. The memory of the anomaly is neutralized, and Cull's tiny pocket of doubt? It remains, but now framed as vigilance, not heresy. It is a safer inoculation. The custodian was silent for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. "Do it. I will provide the archival permissions for the falsified case files. You weave the narrative. Make it seamless." For the next 48 hours, I became the gray ghost. I wrote reports that never happened, cited inquisitors long dead, reference to minor Alpha Legion operative who was eliminated with all his materials seized. I built a perfect circular lie that led from Cull's discovery back into the comforting embrace of Imperial counterintelligence victory. I fed it into the system. We watched. The watchdog algorithm traced the thread. It found my fabricated case files. It compared signatures. It registered a 97.4% match. It filed a conclusion. Anomaly resolved. Source: historical enemy disinformation. No further action required. The flag on Cull's file was removed, replaced with a small positive tag. Employee diligence triggered legacy security review. I slumped at my terminal, drained. I had not spread truth. I had crafted a more beautiful lie to protect a fragile one. I felt filthy. I felt brilliant. I felt like I had taken my first real step into the shadows. Jaren placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of startling humanity. "The first inoculation is complete. The patient did not reject it. The physician is weary. This is the work, historian soul. This is the eternal, thankless work. Welcome to the war for the soul of history. The war fought one lie, one truth at a time." He left me in the gloom. I looked at my hands, the hands that had just forged documents to hide a reality. They were no longer the hands of Arvin Soul, Verispec's examiner. They were the hands of something new, something necessary, something damned. And in the silent vault, the arches seemed to hum with a faint, approving resonance.
Centuries are strange in the deep dark. They pass not as a river, but as layers of sediment. My body, sustained by the vault's arcane technologies and my own now complete modifications, did not age. It adapted. My mind, however, became a palimpsest, a parchment scraped clean and written over again and again, but with the ghost of every prior word still visible beneath. I conducted my work. The inoculations grew more sophisticated. A fragment of the fabricator's genetic theory, disguised as an obscure scholastic puzzle, was introduced into a biomagus's experimental logs on a forge world. It resulted not in heresy, but in a 0.5% efficiency increase in a standard nutrient paste. The improvement was attributed to the divine mystery of the omniscious design. The truth was a silent, tiny victory. A distilled parable based on the Star Warden's fate was embedded in a book of meditations for a particularly thoughtful commissar cadet. He did not become a pacifist. He became known for seeking surrenders over massacres, saving 3 rebel cities over his career. He died a hero of the Imperium, never knowing why the concept of mercy felt to him like a strategic imperative rather than a weakness. I became a ghost in the Imperial machine, a subtle flaw in the program, introducing tiny, beneficial errors that made the system slightly less cruel, slightly more resilient.
I was a myth, even to Captain Geron, who now visited only once a decade. I was the vault's own silent sister, my presence a null field against the worst excesses of dogmatic certainty. But the vault itself was changing, or I was changing in my perception of it. I began to hear them, not just through the terminal, but in the quiet between thoughts. The prisoners. Their isolation was not absolute. A psychic resonance had grown over the millennia, a low-level network of shared memory and pain. I was now part of it. In my dreams, I was the broken weapon, feeling the phantom ache of my lost arm. I was the silent sister, walking through a screaming world in blessed, lonely quiet. I was the oracle, forever falling through branches of might-have-been. They were not speaking to me. We were becoming a chorus. And in that chorus I sensed a new note, a strain of anticipation. It focused on one arch, not the empty one that still waited, a silent threat, not mine, but the one belonging to prisoner Sai, the gray ghost, the eraser of futures. One night, or what passed for night in the eternal chamber, I went to his arch. I did not request an audience. I simply stood before the shimmering haze. "You are restless," I said into the silence. The haze coalesced. The nondescript man stood before me, not in the interview space, but at the threshold of his cell. His void-like eyes held a strange light. "You feel it too, historian. The pattern completes, a cycle ends, a new variable has been introduced." "What variable?" "You," he said simply. "For 10,000 years the dynamic was static, wardens, prisoners, the occasional recorder who became one or the other. You are neither. You are an active agent. You are changing the system from within its own heart. You have created feedback loops we cannot predict." A chill that had nothing to do with temperature crept down my spine. "What does that mean?" "It means the equation is no longer balanced," whispered a new voice. I turned. The Prime Archive stood in the doorway of his own arch, watching. The broken weapons arch was open, his photo lens glowing in the dark. One by one the arches shimmered, not all but many. The silent sister, a pillar of absence, the cartographer, his crystalline nodes pulsing. They were emerging, not fully, but as presences, gathered in the ring of their shared prison. Captain Geron materialized from the main entrance, his guardian spear active, its energy field casting stark shadows. "Return to your cells. This convergence is not permitted." "It is inevitable, Captain," the Prime Archive said, his voice gentle but firm. "You feel it in your aurora might. The gears of fate are grinding. A decision made 10,000 years ago is reaching its final consequence. The historian's work has been a stone dropped in a still pond. The ripples have reached the shore." "What consequence?" I demanded, my heart a drum in the silent vault. The oracle's form flickered into being above us, a weeping angel of light. "The final alternative," she chorused, "the one he could not see because he rejected my path. The future where the relics are not curated, but awakened." Geron leveled his spear. "That is not the protocol. Your knowledge is to be preserved in stasis." "Knowledge is not a fossil," the fabricator interned buzzed, clanking forward on its legs. "It is a seed. It either grows or it rots. We have rotted long enough. The historian has proven the soil is not entirely barren." A psychic wind began to swirl in the chamber, a vortex of ancient memories, suppressed hopes, and colossal, weary anger. The very stones of the vault groaned. The custodian stood firm, but I saw the uncertainty in his stance. He was one, they were many, and I was the catalyst. The gray ghost looked at me. "You have a choice, Arvin's soul. The final choice. You can side with the warden, Help him force us back into our silent boxes. The status quo will hold for another 10,000 years. The Imperium will continue its slow, glorious strangle, or...
Or you can side with the archive, said Brother Chronicler Valerius, his gray armor solid and real as he stepped fully into the chamber. Not to release us upon the galaxy, that would be a storm that would kill everything, but to release the idea of us, to end the curation, to let the truth, the whole, terrible, complex truth, begin to seep out, not as splinters, but as a new foundation. It would mean civil war, Jaren growled. It would mean the end of the Imperium. The Imperium is a corpse pretending to be a man, the broken weapon roared, his voice shaking dust from the ceiling. It is time for the inheritance. The Emperor left us his mistakes, his regrets, his alternatives as our inheritance, not to lock away, but to learn from. You guard a mausoleum, custodian. We wish to build a school. The psychic pressure was immense. I was the pivot. I understood now. My centuries of work were not the main event. They were the key turning in the lock. This was the moment the vault itself had been waiting for. I looked at Jaren, the golden guardian, burdened by loyalty to a ghost. I looked at the prisoners, the living wounds of history, screaming to be heard. I thought of Historta Cole, of the Commissar, of the Magos. I thought of the tiny pockets of doubt, the slight bends towards mercy, the faint questions I had seeded across the stars. They were not enough. They were a slowing of the disease, not a cure. The Imperium would never ask the right questions because it had murdered everyone who knew the answers. I made my choice. I walked to the center of the chamber, between the custodian and the gathered prisoners. I faced Jaren. "Captain," I said, my voice echoing in the psychic storm. "What is the primary duty of the Adeptus Custodes?" He did not hesitate. "To protect the Emperor." The Emperor is gone, a living corpse on a throne. What is left to protect? His vision, his legacy. I swept my arm to encompass the arches, the prisoners. This is his legacy, not the idol on the throne, not the empty dogmas. This, the full, unvarnished record of what he did and why and what he sacrificed. You are not guarding a shameful secret. You are guarding the only thing about him that was truly humanly sacred, his failure, his doubt, his cost. To hide that is to betray him. Jaren's spear did not waver, but his helmet tilted just a fraction. The protocol. The protocol is his final, greatest mistake, I shouted, all my centuries of quiet work erupting into this moment. It is the lie that perpetuates all other lies. He built this reliquary because he could not face what he had done. He made you its guardian because he trusted you with his shame. But guardianship does not mean eternal imprisonment. It means stewardship. It means knowing when the relic must be used. I turned to the prisoners. And you cannot be unleashed. You are toxins in pure form. But your stories, the synthesized truth, that can be the antidote, not to destroy the Imperium, but to force it to evolve, to make it face its own birth and choose what it wants to be now. I looked back to Jaren. Stand down, Captain, not as a surrender, but as the first act of a new protocol, the protocol of revelation.
We do not open the doors. We write a new book with all of us, the warden, the prisoners, and the historian. We compile the true history, and then we publish it. Not to the masses, but to one person, the right person, the next Guilliman, the next true son, and we let that truth work as it will. The silence that followed was absolute. The psychic wind died. The prisoners watched, their collective will hanging on my words. Joren stood, a statue of conflicted duty. Slowly, with a sound like a mountain sighing, he deactivated his guardian spear. He planted it butt first on the floor. He reached up and removed his helmet. His face was streaked with tears of pure, liquid gold. He spoke, his voice breaking. "I have guarded this silence for 300 years. I have heard their stories in my dreams. I have felt the weight of the unsaid truth bending the palace foundations. You speak of a new duty, a harder duty." "The only duty left," I said. He looked at the Prime Archive, at the broken weapon, at all of them. Then he nodded, a single profound dip of his head. "Then let us write the book." And in that moment, in the deepest dark beneath the Imperial Palace, the most secure prison in the Imperium, transformed. It was no longer a vault, or a reliquary, or a shrine. It became a workshop. And we, the forgotten, the damned, the keepers of the dark truth, began our final, greatest work. Not to confess, not to accuse, but to teach. To prepare the inheritance for the children who had forgotten they were heirs to a tragedy, and thus to a hope. My name is Arvin Sol. I was a Verispec examiner. I became a historian in the dark, and now I am a scribe for the future. This is not my confession. It is my invitation. The truth is here. It has been waiting for you. The question is, what will you build with it?